Hello everyone and welcome back to the Menagerie. Today's video is on the Einsatzgruppen. I did a condensed version of this video on my TikTok channel. However, I feel to do it proper justice, I need to read the account in its entirety. So that's why I'm posting this here on YouTube, so you can get the full scope and understanding of what was happening during that time. For a little bit of background information, the Einsatzgruppen was an organization of Nazis that executed Jews, Poles, Roma, anybody that they considered undesirable before the gas chambers were developed. Instead, they would line them up and execute them en masse, and then bury them in mass graves. Horrific business, and when you hear this account, you'll understand just how horrific it can really be. This account comes from Hermann Friedrich Grebe, who was a German-born factory manager working in Ukraine when, in 1942, he witnessed the mass killing of local Jews by an SS Einsatzgruppen unit. I, the undersigned, Hermann Friedrich Grebe, make the following declaration under oath. From September 1941 to January 1944, I was the director and chief engineer of the Dubno branch of the Joseph Young Construction Company of Solingen. In this capacity, one of my duties was to visit the firm's projects. Under the terms of a contract with the Army Construction Services, the company was building grain warehouses in the old Dubno airfield in Ukraine. On October 5, 1942, at the time of my visit to the construction offices in Dubno, my foreman, Hubert Monekis, told me that some Dubno Jews had been shot near the building in 3 huge ditches about 30 meters long and 3 meters deep. The number of people killed daily was estimated at around 1,500. The 5,000 Jews who lived in Dubno before the program were all marked for liquidation. Since the executions took place in the presence of my employee, he was painfully aware of and affected by them. Accompanied by Monekis, I went to the work area. I saw great mounds of earth about 30 meters long and 2 meters high. Several trucks were parked nearby. Armed Ukrainian militia was forcing people out under the surveillance of SS soldiers, the same militiamen responsible for guard duty and driving trucks. The people in the trucks wore the regulation yellow pieces of cloth that identified them as Jews on the front and back of their clothing. Monekis and I went straight towards the ditches without being stopped. When we neared the mound, I heard a series of rifle shots close by. People from the trucks, men, women, and children, were forced to undress under the supervision of an SS soldier with a whip in his hand. They were obliged to put their effects in certain areas, shoes, clothing, and underwear separately. I saw a pile of shoes, thousands of pairs, great heaps of underwear and clothing. Without weeping or crying out, these people undressed and stood together in family groups, embracing each other and saying goodbye while waiting for a sign from the SS soldier who stood at the edge of the ditch. During the 15 minutes I stayed there, I did not hear a single complaint or plea for mercy. I watched a family of about 8, a man and woman about 50 years old, surrounded by their children aged about 1, 8, and 10, and 2 older girls about 20 and 24. An old lady, her hair completely white, held the baby in her arms, rocking it and singing it a song. The infant was crying aloud with delight. The parents watched the groups with tears in their eyes. The father held the 10-year-old boy by the hand, speaking softly to him. The child struggled to hold back his tears. The father pointed a finger to the sky and, stroking the child's head, seemed to be explaining something. At this moment, the SS man near the ditch called something to his comrade. The latter counted off some 20 people and ordered them behind the mound. The family of which I had just spoken was in that group. I still remember the young girl, slender and dark, who, passing near me, pointed at herself, saying 23. I walked around the mound and faced a frightful common grave. Tightly packed corpses were heaped so close together that only heads showed. Most were wounded in the head, and the blood flowed over their shoulders. Some still moved, others raised their hands and turned their heads to show that they were still alive. The ditch was 2/3 full. I estimate that it held 1,000 bodies. I turned my eyes towards the man who had carried out the execution. He was an SS man. He was seated, legs swinging on the narrow edge of the ditch. An automatic rifle rested on his knees, and he was smoking a cigarette. The people, completely naked, climbed down a few steps cut in the clay wall and stopped at the place indicated by the SS man. Facing the dead and the wounded, they spoke softly to them. Then I heard a series of rifle shots. I looked in the ditch and saw their bodies contorting, their heads already inert, sinking on the corpses beneath. The blood flowed from the nape of their necks. I was astonished not to be ordered away, but then I noticed 2 or 3 uniformed postmen nearby. A new batch of victims approached the place. They climbed down into the ditch, lined up in front of the previous victims, and were shot. On the way back, while rounding the mound, I saw another full truck which had just arrived. This truck contained only the sick and crippled. Women, already naked, were undressing an old woman with an emaciated body, her legs frightfully thin. She was held up by 2 people and seemed paralyzed. The naked people led her behind the mound. I left the place with monarchies and went back to Dubno in a car. The next morning, returning to the construction, I saw some 30 naked bodies lying 30 to 50 yards from the ditch. Some were still alive. They stared into space with a set look, seeming to not feel the coolness of the morning air. A young girl of about 20 spoke to me, asking me to bring her clothes and help her escape. At that moment, we heard the sound of a car approaching at top speed. I saw it was an SS detachment. I went back to my work. 10 minutes later, rifle shots sounded from the ditch. The Jews who were still alive had been ordered to throw the bodies in the ditch. They then had to lie down themselves to receive a bullet in the back of the neck. This kind of evil, this extreme level of depravity towards human life, seems so difficult to wrap our minds around. And yet, it happened. And there's nothing about our current moral standards that would stop it from happening again. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this. It was incredibly difficult to read, and I'm sure incredibly difficult to listen to. But I think it's important to understand when war is talked about, when genocides are talked about, when mass murders are talked about, we often view them as numbers, as statistical aggregations of people. Hearing accounts like this helps one to understand that those statistics are individuals. Individual men, women, and children, families, who faced a brutal death I could not even imagine enduring with bravery and stoicism. So that's all I have for today, but I hope that you did get something out of this. And I appreciate you being willing to listen to their stories. Thank you.